What horrible thing did you see that messed with your head for a long time? Story 1. Anyway, this past year at my college, there was a car accident. Not too out of the ordinary, as it's out in the country and people crash all the time and have their cars totaled, but are pretty much fine. I was coming home from a dance class in the city and one of the roads was closed so they could pick up after the accident. No big deal. Later that night around 11:30, I got hungry. All the dining halls were closed, so I decided to drive up the road to Sheetz. It was the road that had been closed, but everything was fine again, so they opened it. Well, it wasn't fully clean. I guess it had been a really horrible accident. The scene was clear, no smashed cars or bodies, but there was broken glass all over the road. And then, after I passed the broken glass, I saw it. The entire stretch of road before me was soaked in blood, with pieces of flesh. I honestly couldn't tell you if it was skin, muscle, intestine, or what in it. It isn't nearly as horrifying as some of the other stories here. I never saw people perish, but what makes it so horrible to me is that I didn't consider it moving until I thought about it later. I saw blood on the street and just thought, oh, right, at first. But hell, man, that's someone's kid. Maybe someone's parents. Someone probably loved these people so much it kept them awake at night. Someone kissed their faces, watched them sleep to make sure they were breathing. Someone kissed them goodbye that morning and never expected them to not make it home that night. And all that blood and flesh was once inside their body, and now it's soaking into the road like they're a possum or squirrel. All of those things used to be neatly tucked inside them and kept them alive, and now it's just a mess to be cleaned up. Someone is going through the worst night of their lives, learning that their loved one was smashed to bits on a country interstate. How would they feel if they knew their blood was still red and soaking into the road, and then I drove over it on my way to get a sandwich? Too long didn't read? Car accidents are really scary stuff. That is exactly what goes through my head when I see blood anywhere. You put it into words better than I could have. It's not so much the blood that gets me, it's the fact that someone will never get to go home anymore. That's what sticks with me. I was driving in LA and saw my fair share of accidents. Never saw any of this kind of stuff. Never really saw any bodies or blood. Mostly it's just covered up sheets put into ambulances, but this person makes a very good point. This person really connects with the humanity of what just happened. It's something that didn't occur to me. Story 2. I witnessed a father swerve out of the way of a driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel, only to witness the car smash into his wife's car, which was following. I was the first on the scene and initially went to the wife's car. Her sternum was crushed, and I initially thought the daughter was unalive. I went to the teenager's car to check him out, and he was pretty banged up. The door was wrecked and stuff was leaking, so I pulled him out of the window and took him over to the side of the road, using an extra shirt I had as a tourniquet. He looked me dead in the eyes and asked me if anyone was hurt. I didn't say anything, but I looked him back. He knew exactly what it meant. He broke down there and I just chilled, telling him it was an accident and his life will go on, until the police arrived. He was on his way home from soccer practice or some stuff and just fell asleep. Sometime during that ordeal, the driver of the truck made his way over to his wife's car and let out a shriek that will be with me forever. It was a sound of helpless terror. I wish it on no one. However, moments later, his daughter began to cry, assuring us all she was not unalive. The wife was unalived instantly, and the daughter was in critical condition for a long time. I also couldn't cross traffic correctly for a day or two, and the smell of radiator fluid will stick with me forever. The accident was in, I believe, Haynesville, Illinois, right outside Grace Lake on Route 120 in probably 2001-2002. Too long didn't read? Father swerves out of the way of sleeping driver only to have his wife's car fatally hit and daughter seriously injured. Pulled a soccer player from the car, couldn't drive right for a week. Also, The Butterfly Effect. That movie messed with me for a long time. The worst thing is, he probably blames himself. And then we've got another one. As much as I've seen accidents when I was driving, I don't think I've seen anyone on the scene that reacted that strongly. I think the cops did a really quick job of cordoning off the area and having the scene controlled so that anybody that was part of or related to people involved in the accidents would be calmed down or at least consoled. Story 3. It probably happened 4 years ago, just after I got my driving license and I was driving back home on a rainy day in March. At some point, I got passed by a motorcycle that was driving around 130, 140 kilometers per hour. Who uses kilometers per hour, right? On the road that had a limit of 90 kilometers per hour. It just seemed like a green wasp flying past my left, so fast that I only caught a glimpse of it. All I could think was, well, this dummy is just asking for it. 5 minutes later, I was passing the scene of body parts all over the road. And a motorcycle that was deep inside the back of a truck. The guy's body was in bits around the rear, and his head was rolling in front of the truck. And the truck was an old piece of Russian machinery, which is made to be literally indestructible. Needless to say, there was an ambulance on its way to scrape him off the asphalt. After that, I've pretty much been on my toes around any motorcycles, trying to keep as much distance as I can. Also, got me quite scared of driving for a week or so. I was in Italy once and was passed by a Ferrari that passed me like I was standing still. Same thing happened. What a stupid way to perish. My dad always said if you spend enough time on the road, you will see some bad things. I have a friend that rides motorcycles. He's still around. He did have a pretty bad accident just on the border from U.S. to Mexico. He was just on this side that they would take him to a hospital in the U.S. He got away pretty easily. Well, he had some back injuries and he had some bruising, but he's still alive. He's recovered. Definitely not like the person in this story. This is like faces of death kind of stuff. Story 4. 2 internet videos gave me shell shock for a week. The first one was entitled Unedited Battlefield Footage. The other was a video from the cartels in Mexico where a couple guys get their heads chainsawed off. The battlefield one was so scarring mentally because it showed a guy stepping on a mine and then the medic doing his job to patch the guy up. It looked like he lost an arm and his leg and maybe his eyes. There was just so much gore, and the poor guy was still alive. I really hope he's okay. I still wonder about that guy. The cartel one was so graphic I almost vomited. The first bite of the chainsaw into the guy's neck and the way his body tensed up and all the blood. Deity, it's horrible. The chain even nicked the other guy in the shoulder, and he didn't react. It's so scary what people can do to each other. I don't go on LiveLeak anymore. I saw the one from Mexico. Makes you think we could use a Great Wall of Texas and California. And I'll say this to show my appreciation as well. I'm glad Texas stands between the rest of the U.S. and Mexico. Story 5. When I was around 8, I had been at work with my dad. He's a golf pro that works at a course, so I used to practice on the range whilst he was teaching. It was about 9 p.m., and we're halfway home when he pulls over the car. I ask why, and he points to the side of the road. There sat a bunny rabbit. Its back half had been hit by a car and was slightly mangled and twisted. It sat there on the side of the road, twitching its nose and staring at me. My dad grew up on a farm. He decided he had to put this bunny out of its misery. He goes to the boot of the car, pulls out his 9-iron, and approaches the bunny. I sit bewildered. I am a massive animal lover, But at this age, I couldn't comprehend putting an animal out of its misery. I still thought my dad was just unaliving this bunny, when we could have easily taken it to the vet to be fixed. He widens his stance, places the back of the iron beside the bunny's head, pulls back, and bam! There was a horrible popping, squelching sound, and my dad shouted, "4!" For weeks, I wouldn't talk to him. I cried myself to sleep for a few nights afterwards. I know that's hard, but I hope you understand now it was a kindness. Suffering is worse than death. Being half unalived and left to perish of thirst is worse. That's a cruel lesson to learn, but sometimes perishing is better. Story 6. When I was 13 or so, some of my friends and I saw a man get curb stomped. Full story is that my friends and I were at a party in North Toronto, and just as we were leaving, a fight broke out across the street. After watching this guy getting beaten for several minutes, they threw him down onto the curb. He put up some weak protests, but he was drunk and pretty severely beaten, so the 3 or 4 guys pinning him down didn't really have a problem. I know I should have left at that point, but I didn't really realize what they were doing until they actually forced him to bite the curb, at which point most of my friends turned away, but I looked just long enough to see them kick him. It wasn't really what you might consider graphic or gory because it was dark and I couldn't see much blood or anything, but I saw his head sort of shoved forward abruptly and his mouth open wider than any mouth ever should. The thing I was most surprised about was that it didn't make any noise. At least I couldn't hear any. Well, the man made a weak moan right before getting kicked, but nothing else. So after that, all of my friends, me included, booked as fast as we could out of there, in case those men had seen us. I don't know if he expired or not, but there was nothing on the news that I saw, so I hope he's okay. Even if he was okay, there's going to be a lot of aftermath. If somehow this person survived, they are never going to be the same again, physically and mentally. I don't know anything about the situation, but hopefully someone reported what was going on. Story 7. This may not be that terrible compared to seeing someone's head popped off, but one thing that stuck with me for a while was a few years ago, I had a coworker whose daughter gave birth to a stillborn child. That's terrible in and of itself, but what they did afterwards just kind of freaked me out a bit. Apparently, they thought it would be a good idea to let the family members that were there hold the lifeless baby, and someone else thought it would be a good idea to take pictures of the family holding the lifeless baby. And then she thought it would be a good idea to bring those pictures to work and show them to coworkers. Yeah, walking up to a group of coworkers and having them tell you that's their unalive grandchild in the pictures kind of burnt those pictures into my brain. This is actually a really common manner of dealing with grief, and hospitals actually encourage it. It's a way for the family to remember the child that they loved even before it was born. That said, I'm not sure bringing the pics to work is the healthiest way of remembering. Story 8. This isn't nearly as terrible as seeing it live, but this one stuck with me. It was the olden days of dial-up internet, before torrents. We're talking Napster, Kazaa, olden days. Naturally, anything you downloaded took forever, and things weren't always labeled correctly. Me, being a young teen, just needed the latest Britney Spears video, for science, of course, so I happily clicked my download and waited several hours for completion. Hours pass and download completes. I'm ready for some hit me baby one more time kind of sweet action. The video opens to a boot pressing down the neck of some young man, laughing in the background. Man wheezing for air, then a knife. Knife right into the throat. To this day, I have no idea if this was real or just some effects shot. I still don't like to think about it, and very rarely now download Britney Spears videos. Seems like I did see an actual unaliving that day, which makes me sad. Maybe I never really wanted to know the truth. I've seen the video you're talking about. I'm with you, man. I felt like garbage for weeks after seeing it. It's been 5 to 10 years now, and it still messes with my head a little. Story 9. When I was like 7 or 8, I was at the park with my friend. We were skipping rocks across the lake when a gaggle of geese came from around the bend. My friend took a rock and skipped it at one of them. It skipped twice, then banked up into the air and hit a goose directly in the head. His neck snapped and fell to the side. He started honking and screaming in pain, swimming over to the shore where we were. He was trying to lift his head, but he couldn't, and when he got close enough, I saw the hole in his head where the rock hit him. I could see his brain. I ran away as fast as I could, but the image and sound was burned into my memory. I'm crying while I write this because to this day, it's one of the saddest things I've ever seen. Luckily, I've never seen a human expire, but this goose was seriously messed up. I called animal control when I got home, but I doubt they did anything. Later in college, I rescued a baby goose egg and hatched it in my room. Eggy Fowler, the baby goose, was a good gift, and raising him made me feel better about the goose I saw expire. How did the friend react? I mean, this is 7 or 8. You're going to expect that some kids are going to do some mean things to animals. It's not right, but I don't know how the friend reacted. Did the friend actually decide this was a bad idea and be nicer to animals? Or did he go the other way? What do you think? Story 10. When I was in middle school, I was walking to a friend's house in Albuquerque along the main road. I was passing by a daycare, and someone was trying to turn left into the parking lot of the building. As I passed the entrance to the lot, I heard a squeal and a smash of metal. I looked back, and that person had turned left into oncoming traffic. The driver must not have had his seatbelt on, as the collision moved him from the driver's seat into the passenger seat, and his head busted through the passenger window. It was hanging limply out the window as the car started rolling, as it's on fire and dripping fluid, rolling right at me. I got the hell out of there, too scared or young to realize I should have stuck around to perhaps give the police an account, though I didn't actually see the accident, just heard it and saw the aftermath. That was the first time I'd ever seen an accident or gore. But what really got me was as I was walking away, all the rest of the oncoming traffic started getting backed up. People are honking, trying to veer around the slow lanes, etc. Some guy leans out the window and asks me, "Was there an accident?" "Yes," I say. "Hell, I'm gonna be late," he says. He tries to change lanes again. It was his indifference to the whole thing that shocked me more. Story 11. 2 Christmas Eves ago, I was coming home from a bar, and in front of my apartment, I saw a few people standing in the street. As I got closer, I saw a man laying in the street screaming. His bicycle crumpled up a good 15 feet from him, blood rolling down the street. Witnesses said it was a hit and run. The cyclist was in shock as he started to dig his fingers into his head. It was disgusting, sad, and I never felt so helpless. The few minutes before 911 came was the longest moment of my life. The cyclist was really getting into his cuts in a totally confused way until a random stranger held him down, who later was drenched in blood and had to be hosed down. Eventually, help came, and he was taken to the hospital, but didn't make it. Now there's a stop sign at the intersection he was hit. But it still bothers me to think about today, and at least wish I saw the car that hit him. R.I.P. It's bad enough when people unalive themselves because they're inattentive. It's worse when people unalive others because of it. I hope there's a hell so people like that hit-and-run driver can go there. Story 12. The dashcam video of the young cop carrying out a routine traffic stop before the crazy man in the other car gets out and charges him with an automatic rifle. The policeman's expiring screams as he pleads for mercy still haunts me. Also, the dashcam video of the family driving along the highway when a brick is kicked up by a passing lorry, slamming into the windshield. There's silence until all of them start screaming and pleading with the person in the passenger seat to wake up. You see the trend here with me, as it's mostly sounds of people in pain or terror that have left the biggest impact. Most horrific videos that are just visual don't faze me, but when you hear the sounds of someone's anguish or their last screams, that really hits me hard, especially when the visual part is left to the imagination. If anyone wants to test their mettle, I suggest a trip to morbid reality. A comedian once called the internet the best invention, the worst invention, the best invention, the worst invention. There's so much stuff that's just available at the click of the mouse. Do you think it's good that we have these kind of images for reference? Or do you think it's bad that this kind of stuff is allowed at all? Story 13. I saw my great-grandmother after she passed away when I was 14. She was 80 years old and was very sick for a couple of months prior to her expiration. She had lost a lot of weight and almost looked like a different person towards the end. My parents and I got the call that she had passed. I was heartbroken that morning. A few hours later, we went to my great-grandparents' house thinking that hospice and the family had taken her away. Oh no, she was still there. Nobody bothered to mention that to me when I went in the house. There she was, the withered shell of my beloved great-grandma. Her mouth was open, as were her eyes. That image haunted my dreams for years afterwards. Wow, I bet it did stay with you. An unprepped body is a different experience than a loved one in a coffin after the mortician has been able to return them to some semblance of what they were. I've seen several of my relatives in such a way, and it's a hard thing to come to terms with. Story 14. A family friend of mine had a broken gun his dad gave him. He would jokingly point it at people and pull the trigger and watch them flip out for entertainment. I did not approve. I walked into his room one day and he pointed it at me, so I flipped out on him, telling him how dangerous that was, and if he ever pointed a gun at me, joking or not, I would beat the hell out of him. I was 5 or so years older than him. We grew up together our whole lives. He tells me to calm down, telling me the gun doesn't work. I didn't listen, still lecturing him about gun safety. He got mad and said, "It doesn't work," and put the gun to his head and pulled the trigger. It went off. It happened 2 feet away from me. I saw everything. He lived on life support for about a week before his dad finally let him go. His head was the size of a pumpkin. Holy hell.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 15. Deity. Nothing nearly as bad as that, but I was driving someone to the airport while it was raining pretty heavily. On the interstate, I got cut off by a vehicle causing me to swerve. The back end of the car hit the front end of a semi. My car wrapped to the front of semi, such that the driver's side window was touching the Mac insignia on the grille. I was pushed what seemed like forever before the truck could slow down. My car then disengaged, and the wheels tried to autocorrect, slamming itself into the median. If it hadn't been raining, my car would have flipped, and I would probably be gone. My parents picked me up and took my friend to the airport. After he disembarked, I broke down, crying. I was probably still in shock. I went home and slept for the rest of the day. Obviously, it took me a while to drive while it was raining. Story 16. I saw my mom bent over cleaning our fireplace out one night to build a fire. My father, who was drunk as usual, was holding a shotgun against his chin. He said, "Dare me?" And she said, "Don't be stupid." I wasn't too concerned because we routinely had to talk my father out of self-unaliving. A few weeks before, he had driven his truck into a tree and said it was because I didn't love him. Then, however, he pointed the gun at my mother. She lowered her head and looked away, said nothing, and out of fear, I turned and hid behind the wall in the kitchen. I heard her scream and the sound of a gunshot. He missed, but the whole experience is in the top 5 worst experiences ever and still messes with my head. Jiminy Christmas, man. Story 17. When I was little, like 4 or 5, I couldn't sleep. So I got out of bed and walked to the living room where my parents were watching a movie. All I remember was this man pulling the skin off an alien. The man then gets dragged by aliens through this tunnel. Scared the hell out of me. Ever since then, I've been freaked out by aliens. I learned recently that the name of the movie was Fire in the Sky, based on a man's story of what happened to him while he was in the White Mountains in Arizona, where I live. Hell. Ugh, that last scene where you see the needle coming down at his eye still makes me cringe. Saw it once when I was a kid. 18 years later, and I refuse to ever re-watch this film. Story 18. I had discovered a car wreck one night. The vehicle was facing eastbound in a westbound lane. The driver was not wearing a seatbelt and was thrown around in the car and ended up being half ejected from the back window. Not only was his torso cut pretty bad from the glass, almost in half, but his head was hanging by a thread. Bad terminology, I apologize. The sight alone was unnerving, but the thing that got me the most was the smell. I have never smelled anything like it before, and if I never do again, I'll be lucky. I had a lot of nightmares after that, and even if I smell blood from a small cut, it reminds me of this. I know the smell. It's indescribable. Story 19. I was driving home from work one day, and this guy had his dog tied to a leash in the back of his pickup truck. Nothing really new there, it's Georgia. Anyway, we get stopped at a red light, me directly behind him, and the dog jumps out, still tied up. The guy bolts off, and I speed up to shout at him out the window that he was literally hanging his dog and dragging it to expiration on the road. I got him to stop, but holy hell, that poor doggy. I'm in Georgia too. What I hate are the guys who let the dogs stand on top of their toolboxes while they're driving. I've seen them fly off. I even saw one jump out into rush hour Atlanta traffic. It's illegal, so cops have been giving people tickets because of it, but stupid is hard to change. Story 20. At the bar with friends, one heads home a bit early and we head to his place for after drinks. Drunkenly crash through his bedroom window to find him just standing there with a blank look, small smile, holding the knife he had just used to slash his wrists and arms apart. Got him to the hospital on time, but still can't shake the look on his face. Sadly, he still drinks, and it probably was alcohol-related. Got him into a support group in time, though, and he's been doing fantastic since, from what I hear. Just had a bit too much bottled up he didn't share. Add in a touch of depression, overnight work, daytime school, and a good amount of alcohol to set it off for a few weeks. Story 21. When I was about 9 or 10, I was in the car with my mom on the way back from the supermarket, and we drove past these kids whacking an overturned box with sticks. Curious, my mom slowed down a bit, and as she did, the kids lifted the box to reveal this tiny ginger kitten, which they proceeded to beat to expiration with the sticks. My mom got out and tried to save it, but by the time she got back to the car, it was just a sad, bloody mess. I couldn't drive down that road for a long time after. That's a horrible image. Sick little jerks. Story 22. I was an EMT for 5 years. I saw a lot of messed up stuff, but the one that haunts me still is this. An old man goes crazy and shoots his wife. He then calls 911 and mumbles about cats. We arrive on the scene, and I see a cop at the top of the stairs. His face is ghost white. I get up there to find the wife in bed with the back of her head blown off. Worst part? She's still alive, physically anyway. We attempt to keep her alive, but there's nothing we can do. Her brains are all over the headboard. She's making crying noises until she expires in the back of the ambulance. I still get nauseous thinking about it. Her husband was sitting outside the whole time we were in the house mumbling about cats. I don't know what happened to him. That's an absolute horror show. Story 23. I caught an episode of America's Most Wanted when I was about 10 or so. It was about these guys who invaded this woman's home and dragged her into her basement where they tortured her to expiration with a corkscrew and stuff, while her friend was held hostage upstairs. Tame compared to most of the stuff here, but I was afraid of the dark for a good few years again after that. There is no limit to what depraved people can do to each other. You don't really need fiction to scare the heck out of anyone. Story 24. Basic training. One of the lads training with me decided to turn the rifle on me, round in the chamber, and start telling me he hated me, despised me, and flat out felt disgusted to be around me. The idea that someone on my side could do that scared the hell out of me. Fatality doesn't scare me. The idea that someone who I'd been shoulder to shoulder with could be that absolutely screwy worried me to no end. It played heck with my head for a few years, actually. Most of my issues stemmed from the forces, and I'm absolutely glad to be rid of them now. Story 25. When I was at my grandma's funeral, I wandered into another parlor and saw a little boy in a casket. It never occurred to me I'd perish until I saw a corpse that was my age. Just because no one else has commented and I feel everyone in here needs at least one person to say something, in all honesty, it was probably hard to deal with, but was also likely a very good experience. Too many people live their lives almost as though they will not ever go. It's important to know that you will go one day, as it makes you live your life more truthfully. Story 26. When I was 19, I had to pull my girlfriend of 3 years out of a car accident. I know technically you're not meant to, but I was terrified that the car was going to catch fire. She expired minutes later, and there was nothing I could have done about it. It took me about a year of completely destroying and rebuilding myself to even begin to get over it. I'm still not fully over it 4 years later. Oh my gosh, that's awful. This was the most moving post in the thread for me. Good luck, friend. Story 27. I stopped a friend from unaliving himself. He had sent out a mass text, goodbye, and I was the first to get to him. I had to basically break into his house and get into the bathroom. Once I opened the bathroom door, all I saw was my friend sitting on the edge of the bathtub, and there was blood everywhere, on every surface. He even wrote, "I'm sorry," with it on the floor. It scared me. I didn't sleep for a week, and I still have nightmares about it to this day. It happened almost 4 years ago. It caused major mental problems that I'm still dealing with. Feels bad, man. Story 28. On July 26, 2012, I was on my way to a camp with the school I'm working with, and we passed a horrible accident. It's nothing new, seeing as most people have seen terrible things in life, fatality being nothing new, but the most disturbing thing was the mother sitting in front of me who grabbed her 4-year-old son and made him stare at the unalive body. To me, that was the most disturbing thing I have ever seen and heard. The whole time the woman is just grinning and holding her son's head to look at it, and he's trying to squirm away. Story 29. Pictures of my little sister drunk and doing amateur corn on the internet. Why the hell would anyone send me a link to the site with simply, "Dude, you gotta see this," as the subject line? Cannot unsee. She died of a horse overdose about 5 years ago. Now when I think of her, I see that friggin' corn. Like I needed to see that. I am sincerely sorry for your loss. Story 30. Some of the videos got me pretty messed up. I looked over some of that stuff. I guess since I'm old and have seen some things, it wouldn't affect me as much as it would folks who luckily have never seen the dark side of what people can really do to each other. What it did make me do was consider just how desensitized I really am, and made me sad for being so. Story 31. For me, the worst thing is those freaking screamer videos. When I see one at 3 a.m. with all the lights out, it literally puts me in shock for months at times. I just recovered from the last one, and I just freaking had one this night. I'm still shaking from that stuff. Those things mess with your head. My wife ran across one a while back and peed herself. She no longer surfs the net with sound on. Story 32. The documentary Restrepo. After I saw it, I thought a lot more about war in general. Seeing kids my age and younger than me that I could relate to, kids that I would be friends with in moments of panic and distress, that really messed me up for a little while. Makes you realize how different your life could have been. Makes you glad you have the life you do, and hopefully inspires you to make that a life everyone can have. Story 33. Watched my friend get hit and perished by a car in the 8th grade. He expired en route to the hospital, but besides the initial blood, it wasn't gory. It's something that's stuck with me ever since, but it hasn't caused any problems in my life. Just a messed up situation to happen in front of your eyes when you're a kid. The look on his mother's face as she ran up to me and my other friend at the scene haunts me to this day. Story 34. I watched the video of that guy getting his head sawed off by terrorists at school. Tried to laugh it off. Messed up my week. The football coach at my high school got in trouble for forcing the team to watch some beheadings. He was attempting to harden them up before a big game. Idiot. Story 35. I didn't necessarily see this, but I've heard the Kevin Cosgrove 911 911 call. After hearing it, I was quite dumbfounded and depressed for a while. I'm not familiar with it, so I won't ask you for details either. I'll find it if I can. I'm finding sounds and imagination has a haunting effect on many people. Story 36. I've seen my friend get her legs cut off by a train and then had her head in my lap trying to help while she was bleeding all over the place, legs detached. I also, a few months later, saw a man crawl under a train to decapitate himself. It's messed with my head quite a bit, but I've learned to deal with it in a healthy manner. Story 37. I work cleaning in a hospital, pathology and morgue department. Seeing blanket-covered bodies is pretty regular for me. I don't recall seeing a non-covered body ever. Well, except skeletons. The worst thing, though, is seeing children's bodies. Story 38. A video posted a while ago of some Russian soldiers being captured and decapitated slowly with a machete one by one. Ugh, I still have nightmares about this. Worst decision ever when I opened that link. Story 39. Nothing phases me anymore, but two guys, one hammer, fricked with me pretty hard. Just the noises he made. It's hellish. I've seen and heard enough of that for one lifetime. I don't need to see it on the computer. Story 40. When I was younger, we had two stab victims come to our door. One with a guy who was still high on ice roaming around the streets. Because I was younger when it happened, it gave me nightmares for years. Also, we live in the middle of frickin' nowhere, so that added to the scare factor. Story 41. My mom's body after my dad terminated her. He hit her with our van a few times. 16 years, and I still see her at the edge of the road sometimes. Story 42. When I was around 6 or 7, I saw a man stand on railroad tracks at the beach and get crushed by the train. It was terrifying for me. Story 43. It got in your mouth? Yes, it still makes me want to puke when I think about it. Story 44. Two guys, one hammer. That one is super messed up. I'm lucky I read a description of the video before watching it. I've never watched it. Story 45. Decapitated head in a poor neighborhood in El Paso, Texas, with spray paint on their faces. Man. Story 46. My sister is self-stimulating.
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.